Welcome to part of our ongoing PhD webinar series examining academic writing through the IMRaD structure. In this webinar, we're going to be dealing with some different concepts and ways of trying to determine what relevant results are for writing a scientific manuscript for publication. It's easy to think that the results section should be rather straightforward when writing a manuscript because our results are merely a presentation of the facts found from our research. However, results are often a lot more difficult to get through and determine what is relevant because they're often entangled amongst each other, as well as with our own interpretation and understanding of those results, causing a sort of interconnected web between all of our results, which can clutter up and make it difficult to really understand which of our results are relevant to report in a manuscript for peer-reviewed publication. And we can think about our manuscripts very much like a narrative or a story. If you have too many characters, just like if you have too many results, it can become very difficult and time-consuming to try to fully develop all of those characters. And so really being able to focus in on the most relevant characters or the most relevant results is a practical and useful way to help us understand what should or should not be included in our results section in a manuscript. But of course, that's easier said than done because trying to determine what results are relevant is like trying to unravel a giant tangled up knot. And instead of dealing with a bunch of aspects on technical writing for your results section, I think it's a bit better that we try to look at a few concepts that might be useful to help us disentangle this knot to determine what results might be relevant to report on. And we're going to focus on two concepts. The first one is we should know the story that we are trying to tell. And connected to this is understanding how all of our story is also interconnected from our introduction through to our conclusion. So if we try to apply these concepts to the examination of our results, we might be able to determine what is relevant and useful to actually include in our manuscripts. The first part is really to try to understand your story. And a good starting point is to simply try to ask yourself a few basic questions about what it is that you're actually trying to write about in your manuscript. Simple questions like, what is the focus of this manuscript? Why is this focus important? How am I presenting my results? So what is my publication format? Is it empirical results? Is it a review piece? So on and so forth. And of course, it's always important to know who your audience is. I would also take this moment of time to say if you haven't already seen our PhD webinar on introductions, we go much further into these types of questions, and it's a good point for you to go and watch that video as well. Although these four questions seem very broad and general, they offer us a really useful starting point, especially when we try to link them with how we've actually started our research. So we should also return to our research questions or our hypothesis, and we want to try to frame these questions as being either problems, puzzles, or gaps. And if we know where we're starting, if we're starting with a problem, or if we're starting with a puzzle, or if we're starting with a gap, it makes it a lot easier to understand where our story is going and how we're planning on concluding, which will help us to understand how everything is connected and which results might actually be relevant for us. So let's look at this idea then how everything is connected. As I've already mentioned, an introduction is a really good starting point because it forces you to deal with these big questions of what, why, how, and who, and try to frame everything that you have done through your methods as problems, puzzles, or gaps, which help to define a direction for the conclusion that we are trying to establish. The real difficult part with our results is in the analysis. All of these stages that have to happen over here as we gather our results, we begin to interpret and analyze them with different methods or different theories. We'll very likely be adding additional literature reviews to help explain or understand or support the results that we have developed. And it is this interconnected web that is very difficult for us to try to figure out if we are only examining our results in isolation. So it's important that we try to think about our introduction and our conclusion in relation to our results because our analysis is what's going to inform our conclusion. And the results that are relevant to inform that conclusion are the results that are most likely going to be relevant to include and discuss in your manuscript. So, a good way of thinking about the overall structure of a manuscript is very much like a racetrack. It starts and ends in the same point, meaning that we need to know what our introduction is, and we also need to know what our conclusion is before we can really determine the most relevant results that help us to complete this circle. So, it is important that from your results, you're starting to develop a firm understanding of what your conclusion is. And it's important that we return to what our introduction is as well. Were we working on a problem, a puzzle, or a gap? Because if we understand where we started, it helps us to give us a better understanding of where we are going. And what I mean by this is if we're introducing a problem, or if the purpose of our research was a problem, then by our conclusion, we're really trying to find a solution, and the results relevant to supporting that solution are relevant to include in your manuscript. If we're starting with a puzzle, our results should build a clearer picture, and that's what we want to try to conclude with, is a better understanding of the interconnections of things. And of course, if we're beginning with a gap, then we want to look for results that are relevant to help fill that gap with new knowledge. Relevant results are those which help to build towards your conclusion, or potentially the results necessary to help us understand as a reader the larger results. So this is where it does get very complex and difficult to try to disentangle. But thinking about your research manuscript in this sort of way might help you to determine what results are less relevant because they're less important or not directly related to developing a solution, a clear picture, or new knowledge that fills a gap. And using these sorts of concepts and thinking about your manuscript as a story is a good way to help you figure out what you can include and what might be less relevant and can be excluded from your manuscript. And of course, for more information on the technical aspects of writing your results section, it's very important that you go and look at the list of journals that you're planning on publishing in and very carefully read over the instruction for authors so that you can get more information on how you should actually structure and write the results section in relation to everything else in your manuscript as you're preparing it for publication. If you've found this video useful, we have an entire playlist series on PhD webinars that we've had in the past. We're running PhD webinars on a monthly basis through the year 2021, so we hope that we can see you in the next.